Hello, everybody, and welcome to A Real Point of View. Okay, so something made Steve like crack up really badly. So
Also,
let's figure out what that is. So Steve, what's so funny, bro?
Our intro was elevator music.
hey, that theme has a long and storied history with this show,
I
Mr.
be-
Mr. Mocker.
I believe
Yeah, we
it's.
tried. We
I
tried, ladies and
believe no no
gentlemen.
no. I believe
We tried.
it's
I
it's. I
like
believe
it.
I believe it's good, but just no. I think it's good, and I think I could definitely get used to hearing it every show.
Uh,
The only thing is my immediate first thought was just being in an elevator.
Okay.
And I'm gonna say we're going to the top.
Yeah.
But it was just like it's kind of just you sit there and you're standing in an elevator and you're going wherever you're going, or like certain movies that have that elevator scene where it's like you've had action, and then they're in the elevator just waiting. And it's just like you could see them pumped up and you could see them ready to go, but it's the elevator music and they're just like, I really can't do anything right now. I'm in an elevator. This music's kind of cool. And then the door opens to the elevator and they just come jumping or rushing out or whatever. That's just like what was going through my mind.
Okay.
I liked it.
Well, that kills it for the next time, though.
I didn't say I didn't like it.
Oh, was it? It wasn't. It
I
wasn't.
like it a lot.
It wasn't the fact that you didn't like it, but the reaction was such that I just I'll figure something else
We
out.
we can we can cut that out in editing.
Say again?
I liked it. What is? How come that doesn't count for anything?
It's not that it doesn't, but it's uh
I
hey,
just
we got
wish.
a show. Let's talk about the show instead. That's
Uh,
a better idea right now.
I,
Because
I apologize. I really should have cut the video on that one. Oh my god.
well, we would have
Uh,
seen your head shaking and doing all that stuff too,
no, no,
Stephen.
no, no,
So
no, no, no.
it was a
Cut
visual
the
too.
video to where you couldn't see the video, but then you do that and you're looking at the critic and like, come on.
He'd still be laughing. Yeah, good point.
He's still like, hey.
All right.
Awesome. So
So
I do have to say that this is probably the most entertaining start to the show I think we've ever had.
okay, that's interesting. Okay. Hey out there, everybody. Welcome to A Real Point of View. I'm Greg, the real movie guy. I guess I'll wave with the other hand too. And then we've got Stephen C., the critic that never picks a bad movie, and he really hit me up to a movie this week that I saw that I thought was really, really good, and definitely a movie that we all need to go see, I think. And then we have Karen D., the movie Maven herself, and we're going to be talking about running, what is it?
Race against the clock.
Like he said, race against the clock, race against time, race against it all. It reminds me of a song. I'm gonna bring up another song. Crazy me. Um, that's by a group called Alabama, and it came out years ago, probably in the late '80s, early '90s, something like that. Called um, it goes something like, "I'm in a hurry to get things done. I rush and rush because life's no fun. All I really want to do is live and die, but I'm in a hurry and don't know why." So everything these days is in such a hurry to get done. Well, we found some movies that people were in a hurry because in many cases it was life and death. And so we've got movies tonight that are kind of time. Time's a big issue. Time's important. Time is something that we need and we need to make very good use of. But let's talk about the movies we have. Some people utilize their time well, some not so much. And so we're going to talk about it. Rushing for time, running for time, running out of time. So what movies did you guys come up with? It doesn't matter. Karen, why don't you go first?
Okay, well, my first movie is a movie that I've long enjoyed. I've seen on numerous occasions, and I watched it again tonight because, and it just brought back some really interesting memories. It's called, for me personally, it's called Apollo 13. The movie came out in 1995. And it stars Tom Hanks as astronaut Jim Lovell, Bill Paxton as astronaut Fred Hayes, Kevin Bacon as Jack Swigert, and Gary Sinise as Ken Mattingly, also astronauts. Ed Harris plays Gene Kranz, who is the commander on the ground of the Houston operations for Apollo 13. And then Kathleen Quinlan plays Jim Lovell's wife, Marilyn Lovell. And then there are various other people who are part of this who are not particularly well-known actors. I mean, they're pretty well-known character actors like Chris Ellis and Joe Spano, Xander Berkeley, but Clint Howard also has a role in this as well as Lauren Dean. The movie's directed by Ron Howard, and it's one of my favorite movies that he's directed. I mean, I think Ron Howard is well known as a particularly adept director. I can point to some missteps he's made over the years. This is not one of them. This is not one of them. His direction of this, I think, is excellent, and it's when he does this type of movie, when he takes the care that he did with this type of movie, that you can understand why he deserves the reputation as a director that he's garnered over the decades. This movie won 2 Oscars. It won for Best Sound. Wow. And also Best Film Editing. So, but it was also nominated for Best Picture. Brian Grazer is the producer of this movie. Ed Harris was nominated as Best Actor in a Supporting Role. Kathleen Quinlan was nominated for Best Actress in a Supporting Role. And it was also nominated for Best Picture by the Golden Globe. So a very well-regarded picture. It's based on the Apollo 13 moon mission. And it means a lot to me personally because, and I'm sure I'm dating myself here, but I remember as a child, the Apollo, I guess it was Apollo 8 or Apollo 9 mission that went to the moon with Neil Armstrong. I remember that was, I don't remember the number of the mission, but it was July 20th, 1969. I remember watching that as a child. And I also vaguely remember Apollo 13. I remember not being as interested in Apollo 13 and it was probably, I think it was Apollo 11 that went to the moon. I don't remember, I remember just not being as interested. The whole country wasn't that interested in Apollo 13, frankly. This was another mission to go to the moon, but frankly, it was like, we've already been to the moon, so what is the big deal about going to the moon again? And that was the sort of sense. I mean, people were sort of, I do remember this specifically. I just remember sort of like a NASA ennui, almost sort of like a NASA boredom had set in. Like, okay, yeah, we're going to the moon. We've been there before. Let me know when we get to Mars, then I'll check in. And because there was no expectation that anything would go wrong, Apollo, the moon mission that actually landed on the moon, had gone so smoothly as far as the American public was concerned, and there was never any expectation that something other than that would happen. So then Apollo 13 comes along, lifting off, I think, on the 13th of April, if I'm not mistaken. So there were like all of these sort of superstitious signs that this was not going to be a good mission. And Jim Lovell, who was the commander, had never been to the moon. He'd been on, he's a well-regarded astronaut, but he really wanted desperately to set foot on the moon. Jim Swaggart was a backup commander who was pulled in at the last minute because Ken Mattingly it was feared that he would develop measles on the ship. As it turns out, he never developed measles, but he didn't get to go on he did not get to go on the mission anyway. He had to be scrubbed in favor of Jim Swaggart. And then there was Fred Hayes. So the whole idea, after they lift off for the moon, everything is going well, and then there's an explosion. Right after Jack Swaggart was asked to, or ordered to, quote unquote, stir the tanks, which was something that had to be done. And I guess it had to be done because of rocket propulsion or whatever, or something to help with the rocket. I don't know why you had to stir the tanks, but stirring the tanks was like a critical element. So he stirred the tanks. There was this explosion. Like, what the hell? What the hell happened here? Well, something blew. And they find out later that like heat shields from their capsule just totally blew off. As it turned out, it was a deformed oxygen sensor deep within the spaceship itself. But they didn't know that at the time. They just know that there was an explosion. And all of a sudden, what became a routine moon mission now becomes a matter of life or death. Not only do they not know whether their heat shields are going to hold up on reentry, they're not even sure if they can get back to Earth, and how they're going to do that. So they're in space, and it's one thing when you're hurtling towards space in a relatively comfortable spaceship, and you headed for the moon, you see the moon in your sights. It's another thing when you hear this explosion, all of a sudden you don't know if you have enough jet fuel, computer power, if anybody even knows how to get back. And then all of a sudden, this is a very cold and empty and hostile place to be in. The Jim Lovell kind of had to keep his other two compatriots calm because Fred Hayes thought Jack Swaggart had done something horrible or screwed up the stirring of the tank. So, they both kind of blamed him for that. And Jack Swaggart's like, it wasn't my fault. All I did was do what I was told. It's not my fault the ship blew up. So nobody really knew about that. And then there's a matter of this teamwork between the engineers at NASA on the ground in Houston and these extremely adept pilots in the ship who are pretty much relying on automated systems, but at the end of the day, at their core, they're pilots, and they want to know about their ship, and they want to know what they need to control the ship. So this teamwork, working together, and then there's the politics on top of that. The fact that before this mission took off, people weren't really engaged. And when it all of a sudden became a matter of life or death, the whole world became engaged. And I think Ron Howard shows very adroitly the impact on these families, the families of the astronauts, because, you're the kid of an astronaut, and, so your dad's going to the moon. Well, okay, it's not like he doesn't get in a spaceship every 6 months. But now you don't know if he's coming back. And not only don't you know if he's coming back, but you have to watch with the whole world to find out if he's coming back. And there was a situation where the wives, and Kathleen Quinlan played Jim Lovell's wife, like I said, but she kind of represented the role of wives. Generally, they were seen and not heard. They were the NASA wives, and they were just supposed to kind of like just sit around and wait for their husbands to come home. And she was like, I'm not doing that. You all are crazy. You're not taking control of my life. You've done enough. I'm taking control. So no, reporters not going to camp out on my front lawn. They're not setting up satellites in my house. And you're going to tell me what's going on with my husband. Or there will be hell to pay, is basically what she said. So I don't know if that really happened. I mean, who knows? But it sure would be interesting if it had. I mean, because this was 1970. So, I mean, the women's liberation movement was just beginning its sort of ascent at that point in time. But I mean, I think the other thing that became very apparent, which is never spoken, but you could see, was that reporters knew more than the families about what was going on with this mission. You know, NASA was talking to them. NASA talked to Walter Cronkite. NASA talked to Jules Berman, who was like the major science reporter on ABC News. NASA talked to Chad Huntley and David Brinkley. They were not talking to the families. So that was interesting. I think Ron Howard very adeptly embeds actual footage from the mission, from NASA files, along with his dramatic footage. Some of the shots that represented the flight in space were just stunning, stunning shots. And the acting was terrific. And even though I remember this flight, and I remember that the astronauts came home when I was a kid and I didn't really focus on it, and I've watched this movie I don't know how many times, I still cheered when they landed, because I was still on the edge of my seat, even though I knew exactly what was going to happen. That's the mark of an excellent film. It's really amazing. It's really just a very interesting piece of history, whether you are old enough to remember the NASA in its space heyday or not. The courage of these men, the courage of their families, and just the way that politics and real life and all of these things that were at stake. I mean, the space race with Russia and America's standing in the world, all of that was at stake. And people coming together. I think the other thing that I love about this movie that seems to be very timely for these days is how people came together. Everybody was bounded together, and they were all rooting for the same thing, which was the safe return of those men home. So anyway, love this movie. It's an excellent movie. Check it out.
Cool. How about you, Steve? What you come up with?
The first movie I'm going to talk about is Escape from LA. It's the sequel. Yes. It's the You got me messed up. It's the sequel to Escape from New York, starring Kurt Russell. It was directed by John Carpenter. The movie was actually spent 10 years in really trying to get the ball rolling and get produced. And it was actually called dead. It was canceled until the earthquake in 94 and the LA riots that really gave it kind of a revived presence for the script. But the story follows Kurt Russell's character named Snake Plissken, and his adventure to LA on behalf of the president under a top secret mission. This is not something he wants to do. Snake Plissken, when he was growing up, the whole storyline takes place after World War III, which happened, and America is all superpowers have kind of joined together. A bunch of countries have joined together to try to basically seize an amount of control. And America is doing what America does, and that's kind of fighting everybody when you think about dystopian futures.
Okay.
And what's happened is Pliskin was a decorated war hero, had two Purple Hearts, was the youngest soldier to ever be commemorated and decorated by the President of the United States. And then he just became intolerant of the government, the way it was ran. Um, it's the president in this timeline has elected or has made a new law, and it's called the Moral American Laws, outlawing tobacco, alcoholic beverages, recreational drugs, which all sounds really good. But then you got outlawing red meat, firearms, profanity, atheism, freedom of religion, and extramarital sex. So it's and if you commit any of these acts, see, here's the weird thing: he denies freedom of religion, but if you repent,
Mm-hmm.
um, you can choose to die by electrocution for your crimes, or you can be sent you can be deported to the island of Los Angeles. An earthquake has torn Los Angeles off of the United States of America. They have built a huge wall surrounding that part of California, so anybody they deport can't come back in. Also, you have on the other side of the country, which you get a little exposition for, but not a lot. Going back to the first movie, Escape from New York, where they've literally built a wall around Manhattan, containing all the deportees and prisoners, and I mean it's a giant prison except it's a city. Um, Pliskin gets captured by the American government, and they need him for a mission. So rather than kill him, they're going to use his skills. They're going to use his expertise to infiltrate as a criminal into LA and recover what's called the Sword of Damocles. And it's a weapon, it's a remote control that triggers a bunch of satellites with EMP capabilities. And the president plans on using these to completely wipe out any electronics, any mobile, anything, devices, vehicles against other countries that may threaten America. And ends up the president's daughter is the one that steals this device from Air Force One and ends up leaving and going into LA. And so they're sending Pliskin in to go get this from um, the president's daughter has given it to a dictator or a revolutionary for LA who has kind of gotten everybody on the same page. Hey, we're going to do this. We're going to take this remote device. We're going to take over America. We're going to make it our land again. We're going to, all these prisoners with guns and crazy people are going to go back and they're going to take America back. It doesn't really sound as bad when you think about what America's doing already, but.
All right.
So um, so Pliskin gets his items from the government and he goes in and he infiltrates. And you meet this crazy cast of characters. You meet Map to the Stars Eddie, which is played by Steve Buscemi. And he's kind of a swindler. And he that's what he does. It's like these old houses that celebrities used to live in, or the new, terrible criminals that he could direct you to. As long as he's getting paid or he's getting something out of the deal, he doesn't care. Peter Fonda is in this movie playing a surfer guy. That's just kind of what he is. It's, hey, that's Peter Fonda. He surfs. Awesome. That's really his whole point in the movie.
Okay.
And then of course, Kurt Russell doing his thing. George Coraface is his name. He plays Cuervo Jones. He's, a renowned actor of in different country movies and everything. But the interesting part about this movie is it does have kind of a nonstop way about it. You get your exposition at the very beginning. You get to find out who Pliskin has been since Escape from New York. He once again has this mission where he has to go in and they infect him with a man-made virus called the Plutox 7 virus. Crazy sci-fi in the early 90s. Let's make stuff up. And he's got 10 hours to live. And he has to get this remote control and he has to get it back to the president and he's going to be cured. So, and then it's just going with him trying to find the virus, him meeting up with these people. At one point, he gets captured and taken into the Rose Bowl, the now torn down and fallen apart Rose Bowl, and in front of all these criminals who know exactly who he is, who have heard the name of Snake Plissken. He completes it. He competes in a game, which is the beat the clock game. So we have literally a beat the clock movie with a beat the clock premise with a beat the clock game
Well, let's beat the
going on
clock.
all in the movie.
Let's
It's
beat the
insane.
clock.
And what he has to do is basically he plays basketball. And if he doesn't score a point in time, he gets shot.
What?
He has 30 seconds on the clock, full court. You get your own rebounds. You shoot. You make a basket. You run. The clock resets. You go all the way down to the other end of the court. You shoot. You make a basket. The clock resets. You go all the way to the other end of the court until you get 10 points. And so it's little things like that that kind of break away from the story, but also give it a little different nuance that you don't see in very many different movies. We get to the end of the movie, and Pliskin gets his way, but
Spoiler.
it's a very different kind of way that he gets his, because he's so disgusted with what America's become. He's so disgusted with humanity and people, and he wants everybody to go back to being human. And his line at the end of the movie is he's actually breaking one of the laws. He lights a match and is smoking a cigarette, and he looks dead into the camera and looks dead in to, while you're watching this movie, he looks dead into your eyes, even though he's on the screen and you have no idea who he's looking at. But he's looking at you.
Right.
And he wants you to know, welcome to the human race. And then the movie ends. So it's kind of that you get the ending, and the ending is directed at you at the end of this movie. It's not just directed to everybody in the audience. It's not directed to, the group of people that actually went out and saw this movie. It's you, the individual,
Right.
that he's really directing this to. He is, with his one good eye, because Snake Plissken only has one eye. He's got a patch on the other one, and he's staring directly through you. And I feel like it's just a fun movie, and it's kind of a comedic yet darker toned representation of 90s apocalyptic dystopian future. So I really feel like it's a very enjoyable movie, but I mean, don't go in expecting to get any major revelation about yourself or anything like that in this movie. But it's a very enjoyable, and the different twists that it's got to it, but it has a lot of open-endedness too.
Okay.
So
So would you consider this the kind of movie that could easily become somebody's guilty pleasure?
yes, this is a Big Trouble in Little Chinatown type movie. Of course, Kurt Russell starring in Big Trouble in Little Chinatown. So but yeah, it's got that guilty pleasure that when you tell people you watch it, but they're like, oh, okay, well, I mean, I'll check it out for you. No, you don't have to watch it. I'll watch it. It's okay.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. You want to be able to say to people, yeah, this is a good movie or not good movie,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the circumstance, as in order to see it or not see it. But you don't really want to go see it for a person in the sense of, to save you, I'll go see it at like a
Mm-hmm.
martyr.
Yeah.
It's more the case of, you know, we've seen it, we make recommendations or not, but ultimately, if you're driven to see it, you got to go see it. You got to go see
Yeah.
it to get your own opinion about it. But at the same time, we're hoping that you hear what we have to say at least, and then of course make your decision. Um, but hopefully, siding with us and don't go. No, I'm just kidding. But uh, you
it's
know,
it's it's one of those movies where I have to know the person and know what the person likes about the movies. Like, I would want you to go see it, Greg, because
well,
I know
here's
you'd get I know you'd get a kick out of it. I wouldn't want Karen to go see it because I know she'd come back and go, "Why did you make me watch that movie?"
Exactly. I
Well,
feel the same way about Big Trouble in, I mean, Escape from New York and Escape from LA, both.
oh, you seen both of them, Karen?
I've seen them both, and they're not my favorite movies, I gotta be honest.
Yep, I've actually seen them both, Steve. It's just I saw them when they came out
Hmm.
back in the day. Because I like you, and what you may or may not know, ladies and gentlemen, Steve's a big Kurt Russell fan, and I'm a fan too of a lot of his
I
movies.
mean, I like Kurt Russell too, and that was kind of like must-see movie watching when those movies came out. So I remember going to the movies to see both of them.
Awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely some cool stuff.
Greg,
Kurt
do you have a
Russell.
movie?
Oh, sure.
Oh, no, continue your thought, but I was just like, hey, Greg has a movie too.
Yeah. But Kurt Russell I've been a fan of his. I like him in Executive Decision, for example.
Hmm.
Oh,
Um,
that's my favorite movie with Kurt Russell.
yeah, and see that's a good one. And Tombstone was pretty good. Um,
Another good one.
yeah, he and Val Kilmer did a pretty decent job. Um,
Yes.
and ironically, just making a segue, so we had the Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer um, Tombstone, which was about Wyatt Earp and the OK Corral. Then we have the Wyatt Earp with Kevin Costner, and then we had the original Gunfight at the OK Corral with Kirk Douglas and I don't know why I cannot ever remember his name. He's a great actor. Um, Elmer Gentry. Who was that, Karen?
Burt Lancaster.
Thank you, Burt Lancaster. So Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas in the Duel at the OK Corral. And so all wonderful movies, but Kurt Russell, he reminds you every time he's in a decent movie that he's a really, really good actor. So yeah, definitely a good movie choices if you're looking at something very, very different in sci-fi, especially back in the day. Okay, so I picked a movie um, which I think goes along this relative theme of time, kind of running out of time, trying to, um, deal with time issues. And in this movie, we have a guy who's part of a criminal crew who is uh, given the chore of getting rid of the gang's guns whenever they do something that use a lot of guns, whether it's robbery or sometimes murder. This guy's in charge of getting rid of the guns so that there's no trace and they can't be traced back to anything and anybody in the gang. Um, so everything seems to go fine, and there's another big situation where people are injured or killed, and they give the guns to their guy, their ace in the hole, who gets rid of all these guns, and something goes very, very wrong. And now it's a race for time for this guy to try to right that wrong. So the name of this movie is Running Scared, and literally the main character in this film is running scared because he's got to make sure that he finds out what happens in this situation and that he had true control over initially and no control over now as the movie continues on. Now, the really cool thing about this movie is it's broken up into different things that are happening with different people. So you're seeing it through the eyes of more than one person. And this is one of those early films where they're really experimenting within that concept of, seeing it through this person's eyes or that person's eyes or that person's eyes. And this guy happens to be a family man. So he is a guy who, he's a tough guy, but he's a family guy. So he shows a lot of emotion. Um, and then one day, something really bizarre happens. He and his family are sitting down at the table to eat something, and a bullet flies right past them in their house. And this seems to cause a whole bunch of domino effect scenarios within the frames of this movie. And so now we've got what's going on where a bullet comes to the house. Well, there's something going on in the neighbor's house next door. And then the neighbors are new in the neighborhood, and they've got a son who plays with your son. And then between the two of them, their mischief causes a lot of angst for the family. And so now the ball's rolling, and the ball continues to roll, and those dominoes are going down fast. They're going down fast. They're going to the next section, the next section, next section, next section, and then the ball drops, and then the mouse runs, and then he goes, and that's how this movie goes. This movie goes so fast sometimes, you gotta stop it and just catch your breath. Now think about this being in the major theater, ladies and gentlemen, where you can't stop and take a breath. I mean, you can get up and go get some popcorn or go get to the bathroom or whatever, and you think to yourself, oh my God, I got to slow down. But, you know, at the theater, they're not going to turn it off and slow it down. So it's kind of cool these days to have this movie, since this movie came out. I think this movie came out like 2006. So you have the ability anymore to, you know, pause, calm down, take a breath, get refocused, definitely go to the bathroom because you're going to be running when you get back. That's how this movie goes. It just continues to run and run and run and run and run and run. And so this movie stars the late and starting to become great, I think, Paul Walker. And one of Karen's favorite actors, and I always say his name wrong, Palminteri.
Chaz Palminteri, yes.
And who's the major villain in this film. And then you've got Vera Farmiga, who is a really, really good actress. And she plays the love interest / I guess, wife of Paul Walker in this film. And then there's this major situation being developed, having nothing to do so directly with Paul Walker's angst, but now it's the angst of the neighbor's kid. And what he's going through and how he's trying to survive through all these crazy things that are starting to happen in his life ever since the gunshot came from his house through Paul Walker's house. This movie is a whirlwind of all these different things going on. And then the fact is now the wife finds and feels that she's got to go and put things in her hands because now her husband's not around and doesn't know where he is. And so she's got to try to help the situation. She's trying to find out something more about this kid, and he seems to be missing. And so she takes it upon herself to try to kind of find that out. And then she kind of figures out something, and now she has her own dilemma that she has to deal with. So Paul Walker's dealing with his, and with he and his son trying to deal with his. Then she's trying to deal with where is everybody, and in the midst of trying to find her husband, she's trying to find the neighbor's kid. And then the neighbor's family doesn't seem like they care. And then there's the prostitute. Yes, a prostitute comes up in here some kind of way.
I'm scared.
I'm running scared. But you should run scared straight to the video store, straight to the streaming capabilities to see this movie, because this movie is a stellar movie. I give this movie, like, if we're going 1 to 10, this movie's like an 8. It's really, really good movie. It's very fast paced. There's a lot of action in the film. You feel for the character, the main character, but yet he's a criminal. And so you feel for the criminal's wife because he's a criminal, and so he has to deal with him being a criminal. And then you feel for the little kid because his friend is missing, and someone's got to find him, and he's got to convince his dad to find him. And then he realizes the dad's like, yeah, I need to take you with me because we got to find this kid. And then the wife's like, well, I need to find this kid because there's something really weird about these people. And then the next thing you know, the wife's packing a pistol. So this is a really interesting movie and has a lot of different scenarios. And you're not going to ever get lost, don't get me wrong, but you are going to be taken to all these different places, and they all tie in the end. And then there's a surprise ending. Everything you think's going to happen, yes, breathing is paramount. Everything you think's going to happen kind of does. And then there's a surprise ending, and then you're going, and now you do. You inhale and you exhale. You breathe, and then you're like, oh no, again. They don't even let you just sit there at the end. They still jolt you. It's like the jaws of life opening the car door, or the paddles of life that they do. They
clear,
and you're like, and you get, and that happens at the end of this movie. This is a really cool movie. This is a lot of fun.
Okay.
I watched this movie with my wife originally, and we're both sitting there going, okay, let's pause it for a minute and just stand up Stretch out a little bit.
Shake it off.
Uh, okay. And oh yeah, get some water because we need something to drink. And
Okay, back to the pressure cooker.
Refill the popcorn. Let's go. And then you're like, okay. And then you sit there and you pause for a second. You go, look at each other and go, are we ready for this now? Yep. Okay, we got through the first 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Let's get going to the rest of the movie. You know, you're like, whoa. You know, I think the slowest minute at this one is at the credits at the end. So yeah, and even they're going kind of fast, but retrospect to the movie, kind of slow. You know, you can actually read it. You know, you feel like you're like speed reading because you know your adrenaline is so high right now.
Wow.
But definitely, if you got to take your medicine before watching the film, definitely do that. Good idea. But yeah, this is a great film. Again, Running Scared. IMDb gave it 7.4 stars, which is really, really high for IMDb. And I gave it 8, so that's really high for me because I'm usually kind of with IMDb-ish in my ideology of rating. So definitely see this one. Paul Walker, one of the better movies that he was in. And you'll forget Fast and Furious because you won't be needing a car. You'll be running in this one with these guys. So Karen, what else you got for us?
Well, my second film is called 13 Days. So I guess I'm like Little Miss 13 on this show.
Hey, it's okay. It's October, Halloween month. It's good.
Apollo 13 and now 13 Days. This movie came out in 2000. It is one of my all-time favorite films. I ran to the movies to see this in 2000 when it came out. And it's a must-see movie if you even begin to call yourself a history buff, especially about American history. This is a must-see movie. 13 Days is about the 13 days that elapsed during 1962 and what has become known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. And President John Kennedy was in office at the time. Robert Kennedy was the Attorney General. Bob McNamara was Secretary of Defense. And what happened was that a U-2 bomber saw evidence of medium-range ballistic missiles being installed on bases in Cuba. At the time, I mean, Cuba was a communist country and they were very friendly with the Soviet Union. Castro had been in power by 1962 for almost 10 years. So this came as quite a shock to our American government because Cuba is only 90 miles from the United States, and medium-range ballistic missiles were reasonably estimated to hit pretty much every part of the United States if launched by the Soviet Union, with the possible exception of Seattle and maybe Hawaii and Alaska. So this was a serious issue. The other thing that sort of shrouded this whole problem for the Kennedy administration, for the country, was that we were still recovering from the Bay of Pigs, what became the Bay of Pigs fiasco. Something else that happened in Cuba, where there was a very unsuccessful, notoriously internationally known attempt to take out Castro as the leader of Cuba. So after all that, trying to deal with Cuba, trying to deal with Russia, in a world where the Cold War was still a factor, just was an extremely tough situation. You also had a very young president, Kennedy, untried relatively, and one of his attempts, the Bay of Pigs, didn't work out that well. And you had Robert Kennedy, probably still the youngest attorney general ever appointed to that position. And all of these sort of like kitchen cabinet Harvard type people who weren't well known to Washington circles. And then you had the Pentagon full of old Washington war dogs who thought they knew everything about how to manage a military campaign. But Jack Kennedy was commander in chief. you know. And so when you have this situation, it's like, yikes, what are we going to do? We have got to make sure these missiles are taken out before they become operational. So Kennedy calls in the Joint Chiefs, led by Curtis LeMay, and calls in defense and the Navy and the Air Force and all that, and Lyndon Johnson too, although he didn't have much to say. And he says, okay, finest minds in the country, what do we do? And the general thought is, well, we take them out. We take out those missiles. We either take them out with a surgical strike, or we do a surgical strike and an invasion, or we do a surgical strike and invasion and we do some diplomatic crap, but we really need to take them out. We really need to go to war. And the Russians only stand one thing. They only understand one thing, and that's force. And they only understand one thing, and that's action. And if you don't do that, then we're really going to be screwed. And then you have these Pentagon people going, okay, we're ready to go. You just need the order. We're ready to go. We're ready to go. We're ready to go. We have a limited amount of time. We've got to do this. Otherwise, we're at risk of nuclear war, and we're going to be the victims. We cannot have that, and we cannot have Cuba basically holding us hostage. And then you have Kennedy, who's so very, I mean, just amazingly played, in my opinion, by Bruce Greenwood, who's one of my favorite actors. He's a Canadian, but I still love him. He's a terrific actor. I remember him from the days of St. Elsewhere. But you have Bruce Greenwood playing Jack Kennedy with the back pains and the spasms, and this very finely tuned mind, this very cerebral mind, which is just infuriating to these Joint Chiefs. These are men of action. These are men of war. They've been tested in war. And Jack Kennedy, even though he's a war hero, I mean, his back got blown out in World War II. And he was saving men. That's why his back got screwed up. So it's not like he doesn't know what war is about, but he's still considered, he's so young, and he's like this rich Harvard intellectual. And what does he really know about being in the trenches with war? And what does he know about managing major campaigns? He had no crap about that. So it was infuriating to people like Curtis LeMay when they would say, we've got to take action. And Kennedy's like, so what I hear you saying is, we need to take action. Yes, damn it. You're going to need to blow this stuff up. Well, let me think about that. Or let me walk out the room. Let me walk out there and walk around the block and think about this a bit. What happened? When are we going to take action? What is he waiting for? Was he waiting for an invitation from the Russians? What? And then on top of that, you have Adlai Stevenson, who was the primary negotiator at the UN. Russia was part of the UN Security Council. And Adlai Stevenson, who had run an unsuccessful campaign for president, was widely regarded as a weak person, a weak politician, and a weak diplomat. But he was the man who made the Russians admit in front of the world that they actually were building those missiles. He's the one. And if it had been up to Bobby Kennedy, he would have been pulled out, and maybe the course of the world would have changed. This movie, if you're a history buff, you're really going to like this movie. If you know anything about American history, it's fascinating because you've got this young administration dealing with the Bay of Pigs. There's also the civil rights crisis going on in Mississippi and Alabama. That was a major pain in the side of Jack Kennedy. And you've got other things. And then you've also 1962, it's not that far away from the 1964 presidential election. So they were chatting about that at the time that the Cuban Missile Crisis comes and basically blows everything out of the water. And there is literally a race against the clock to not only make these missiles operational, but there's also a race between Kennedy and the Joint Chiefs. You know, who is going to exert their will? Kennedy's the commander-in-chief, but is he commander-in-chief in name only, or can he really command the Pentagon? And does the Pentagon really know better Do we really have the military running this country, or are they really going to do as their commander-in-chief tells them to? What's going to happen? And we literally, I tell you personally, I know this, we were literally at the brink of nuclear war. We really were that close. My father was our father, Greg was my father, he was in the Air Force Reserves. He was literally called up and literally one day away from being shipped overseas. My mother was in tears trying to figure out how she was going to raise 3 children alone, with my father going off to war, literally to war. So yeah, it was totally real. That the notion that we were walking up to the brink was totally real. And this notion of a blockade was a brilliant, brilliant suggestion that McNamara came up and nobody thought would work. Absolutely nobody thought would work. And it did. It did what it was supposed to do. So this movie, again, going in, I ran to the movies to see this, like I said, and I knew what the ending was, and it still had me literally sitting on the edge of my seat. It had me in tears at, when it became apparent that we actually were going to win the day and that we could get back to peace. Or some semblance of peace, because there was still civil unrest at home, and the space race and all these other things on the agenda. We really didn't have time for a Cuban Missile Crisis, but we had to make time for it because literally the world was hanging in the balance. And I think this movie, even though there are a lot of dramatic liberties taken with this movie, Kevin Costner's role as Kevin O'Donnell is really amplified and completely turned around and changed compared to what it really was. But that's one thing. And there were other liberties taken with things that were said or not said. I think Lyndon Johnson's role was ridiculously diminished. I don't think it was that diminished as it was portrayed in the movie. But those are quibbles in my view. The movie gets across literally what happens when you're faced with what could be the end of the world. What do you do? And these are the brightest minds. And even the brightest minds can screw things up. I mean, Curtis LeMay was bright. And if we listened to him, I don't know what kind of role we'd be in right now. And Curtis LeMay thought Kennedy was weak. And McGeorge Bundy thought Kennedys were weak and lacked moral fiber and all this other stuff. So there was that general sense from the Pentagon that the Kennedys weren't up to it. And the Kennedys had the general sense that Adlai Stevenson wasn't up to it. And, I mean, there was a lot of finger pointing going on. But at the end of the day, the finest minds had to come together because the American people were dependent on their government to do the right thing. And they came together, Republicans, Democrats, came together to do the right thing with a peaceful solution. And that's how it happened. So to see that, again, I think the movie just has some interesting parallels to the times we live in today, when people are so fractionalized and so polarized. This was a time when Americans really came together. And this movie beautifully portrays that.
Cool.
Awesome.
I don't even have like a rebuttal or nothing.
Yeah, I got nothing. That was awesome.
Yeah,
Good job.
nothing. Me too, Steve. I got nothing. And like
You know
part of me wants to find something,
right?
And I can't do that. That was really good, Karen. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm kind of like sad I have to follow that.
and
Whatever.
and the cool thing about it is it wasn't a rant. It was more of a pouring out of emotion about something that was important in our lives. That if we're here because of those things, so it's kind of cool.
Especially considering you two were there for it.
I wasn't.
Literally developing while you're.
Yeah, you were. Yeah, you were.
No, I wasn't.
You were a baby, but you were there, hon.
Okay, here's the thing. I was a baby. I wasn't a baby that even understood what a 13 was, let alone people who call 13, because I don't know nothing about that.
You were the reason my mommy was in tears. What am I going to do with this baby?
Look,
I
you
got
made your
this
mother cry. Good
baby.
job. You made your mother cry, Greg.
Often.
He says with a measure of pride.
And not
The
always
beam.
because of being an extrovert, because I was just, I was as Karen put it, I was a baby at the time. Shoot, I was doing my thing. I was wetting up diapers. I was doing my thing.
Yeah.
I ain't
Gonna be
gonna
kind of
lie,
hard to find diapers in the bunker. I'm just saying.
but hey, because of what was going on in Washington, I didn't have to worry about no bunker baby.
Yeah.
Mom didn't have to worry about no bunker baby.
See, now this I can follow.
You're welcome.
Gee, Steve, I wonder what kind of movie you have for us.
One far more ridiculous than what you just had. The movie that I got, it's an Al Pacino movie. It came out in 2007. It's a thriller film. Directed by John Avnet. I believe that's how you say it. And it stars Al Pacino portraying this character, Dr. Jack Graham, who is a forensic psychiatrist for the FBI. Well, the movie starts out with a scene in an apartment where these two girls, twins, are getting ready for bed, and they're in their apartment. They, you know, nice sisters live together. You know, everything's cool, and you slowly see from the outside, creeping up from the stairs on the outside of the apartment, you see this figure who's got a leather jacket on and a toboggan pulled down over their heads and messing with the window. And the one girl's going to bed and the other girl's going to get cleaned up before she goes to bed. And you just, the music, there's music on in the background, and this guy breaks into this apartment. And you kind of don't know what's really about to happen. You just know he's breaking into the apartment. The one sister that's in bed already is mad because the music's blaring. Well, the sister comes out, turns around, bam, he gets her. And then next thing you see is her getting tied up and her being lifted off the ground. And then this incident happens, and you see the cops are in the apartment, and this one of the twins. It was Jamie and Janie Cates, and um, Jamie is on the ground covered in a blanket with blood on her face, and she's trying to give this report to the cops. And the scene transitions pretty fluidly to Jack Graham, which is Al Pacino's character, on the witness stand, trying to deliver his testimony of what he believes as a forensic psychiatrist, exactly what happened that night. And he delivers such a crucial and expert and uh, uh,
Testimony.
confident, yeah, opinion. And then with Janie Cates's testimony as well, they convict the person the police are calling the Seattle Slayer, John Foster, which is played by Neil McDonough. I
Oh, I
love as
love
an
him.
actor. He's been in some really good movies, and he's been in some B movies that just really haven't lived up to the expectation you have for him. But I think all around he's done a good job in every movie he's been in of trying to make the movie a little bit better by his presence.
Yep.
And so John Foster receives this conviction, and Foster turns to look at Graham as he's about to be carried out of the courtroom and taken to jail, and he says, "Tick tock, doc." And just that little instance of tick tock. So we're talking about race against the clock movies, really getting into crunch time, and here's this convicted killer looking at the guy who basically single-handedly got his conviction, except for the sister, and telling him, "Tick tock, your time's coming." Fast forward 9 years later. Kind of one of the things I hate about movies, but whatever. And John Foster's execution date is coming up, and actually Janie Cates goes to Jack Graham's uh, office and presents him with cookies, and to kind of, because it's the anniversary, the person who murdered her sister, the person who got to her too, um, is about to be executed, and it's not really necessarily a joyous occasion, but she's thankful that he gave her, the ability to be able to do that, to testify and put the murderer in jail. Well, uh, now Jack Graham, while working with the FBI, also teaches at a college in Seattle, and he teaches law students, and he teaches soon to be, also trying to be forensic psychologists or anything like that, um, in his classes. And he's known as a guy that kicks people out of his classes. Like, if you don't do this a certain way, or if you rub him the wrong way, or if you don't live up to the expectation that he kind of sets for you, he gets rid of you out of the classes, because he doesn't believe you're going to be able to help and survive the job and the experience that is necessary. Well, as he gets into the parking lot and he's walking into the school, he gets a phone call. And when he picks up the phone, he goes, "Hello." And the person on the other line, with a really kind of weird, almost automated voice, says, "You have 88 minutes to live. Tick tock, doc." And then hangs up the phone. And so he calls his office. He calls people that he knows to try to get um, a trace on this phone and figure out what's going on, where the phone call's coming from. So he goes in and he walks into his class, and his classroom, being taught by his assistant Kate, or his teaching assistant Kate, um, the comparisons of John Foster to Ted Bundy to what's the other guy? Ted Bundy, Gacy, other serial killers, comparing him to them and relative similarities and stuff like that. And he gets another phone call that, "How does it feel to have your time ticking away? 87 minutes, doc. Tick tock, doc." And then the movie pretty much revolves around him trying to figure out who's making these phone calls, how everything is happening. And he slowly slips into this paranoia where he believes that Foster from jail is organizing all of this, even though he's behind bars. And at one point in the movie, because um, a murder takes place, which is which is a girl that used to be a student, Rams, gets killed in the exact same way the Seattle Slayer was killing these girls and hanging them up and torturing them. And then another girl who Graham had relations with the night before ends up getting uh, tortured and strung up the exact same way. And now his fingerprints are all on it, and he's got, there's all of his, what's the word I'm looking for?
Expertise?
No, not his expertise. Basically, his DNA, his fingerprints are all over,
Oh,
are attached to these murders now. And it's him trying to outrun other people who believe he may have gone crazy and is actually the Seattle Slayer, when he's got another guy that's in jail. People believing that he uh, Janie Cates and purged himself on the stand in front of the jury, that got the jury to believe so hard. And at one point, Foster is basically granted a suspension of his execution day,
Hmm.
or a stay of execution. And this slowly starts to drive Graham, and he's his teaching assistant student Kim has been helping him steps of the way, and he finally has to reveal uh, what's been going on, the phone calls that he's been getting, and he's getting notations and notes and everything for a countdown the entire movie. Like
Hmm.
you understand that the clock is ticking. Everything he's doing, he has to think fast. He has to move fast. He has to understand who he needs to believe, who he can't believe. Get people on his side as he's going, and then you learn the reason behind the 88 minutes and why it's so important to him. And there's really a couple scenes in the movie that kind of startle you. It's not a movie where something just like really jumps out in front of your face like horror movies do and stuff like that,
Uh-huh.
but it's just the not necessarily the randomness, but the reasoning and the just sheer like, hey, this happened, and this happened before the movie even tells you, kind of things that kind of jump out at you. And then you're waiting for the exposition, and you're waiting for the plot that tells you the reasoning behind a couple different things that go on with this movie. And it does a real good job. My girlfriend and I watched it last night, and she got really upset because the movie's not 88 minutes long, and the duration of everything is not 88 minutes. So
Now, now, ironically, I was
she's
going to
kind of
say,
OCD, things like that.
ironically, I was going to say, so is the movie 88 minutes long? But
The
Yep.
movie is 111 minutes.
What's
Well,
the name of the movie?
it's called 88 minutes.
Oh, it is. Okay. Okay. I didn't realize that.
Yep, the runtime is 111 minutes. And yes, all of this doesn't take place over 88 minutes.
well,
But
yeah, you have to develop the plot a little bit, or else you wouldn't understand what was going on in 88 minutes in the first place. So,
right, right,
yeah, I
right,
get
right.
that.
But you
And
have you have some kind of like these real suspense movies that
mhm.
actually tick down in real time. Like
Yes,
what was the movie with Johnny Depp? It was a remake of Narrow Margin. That was done in real time. It might have even been called Narrow Margin again, but takes place in the train station, all this other stuff, but
hmm
he had like a certain amount of time to keep the governor from being assassinated, and you saw the clock in the train station ticking down in real time. So there are movies like that. This one took a different path,
hmm
obviously.
and it does a real good job with a couple tosses, or a couple turns, a couple curveballs, but it doesn't really, except for the minor little things, it doesn't really surprise you as the movie's going. You kind of get a feeling, how this ends, but a really good job of this movie without Al Pacino is nowhere near as good as this movie with Al Pacino. And Al Pacino is one of those guys that you can't really fit somebody in where Al Pacino was and say, oh, somebody could have done just as good a job.
Right.
But he really does bring a certain air about this movie, and makes it be with his acting and the way he views things, the way he talks to certain people in the movie, and trying to portray that psychiatric psychologist type of person. I feel like he does a really good job of that. And even though it ends the way you think it's going to end, in this movie, you're still getting there is enjoyable. Um, and it doesn't seem, for a movie that's 111 minutes, which we got movies running in the 120s, 130s, hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes now. The movie doesn't feel very rushed, even though he's
Hmm.
getting from place to place to place. There, every time he stops, they let the scene develop as
Right.
he's going, and I feel like they do a really good job with that. And the ending is actually kind of fun with a couple of the quips and the back and forth he has at the end.
Hmm.
I have actually
Interesting.
seen this movie too, and I did enjoy it as well. It's been a little while since I've seen it, but I agree with you. Al Pacino's a stellar actor, so it's really hard to see him not in this movie. And the way he
Hmm.
tends to be. What's funny to me is I've seen quite a few movies, and sometimes he seems methodical, and this movie doesn't allow
Hmm.
him to be that, and
Hmm.
that's kind of cool here. And even this particular instructor is somewhat methodical in how he looks at things.
Right.
And so
Right.
now he can't be that. He has to be spontaneous. He has to be assertive in order to make sure that he's ahead of that time and not behind.
Right.
And that's the kind of cool thing about this film. So I really enjoyed that too.
One
And
scene
really,
in the movie. Oh, so, one second. One scene in this movie that really plays into what you're talking about of him being methodical and this movie needing him to act spontaneous. Um, there's a car that they're going to, and they're going to go get in this car, and just for some reason, the electronic key won't work, and it just clicks in his head. He's like, "Oh, there's something wrong with the car. We gotta go." So he grabs the girl and he throws them on the ground, and nothing happens. Nothing happens. You're sitting there, and he's, wow. I don't. I thought something was gonna, and then all of a sudden the car blows up. So it gives you that moment of pause where talking about what you this being a methodical character, where him using his methodology, he thought that it this was all getting away from him in that moment, and then it turns out he's not as he's not as off his game as he was led to believe in that moment.
Right,
So
which gives a some kind of an innate um, moment of euphoria. Now I can do this. I can get past this. I'm
mm,
already ahead. And so now I'm going to continue to be ahead as long as I keep going. So let's get out. Let's get up. Let's get going. Let's keep going. And we'll be ahead of this thing and at least have some minutes to use at the end if we need to. If I need to, because it's me that's going to not be here in 88. Oh, 12 minutes, 16 minutes, whatever it is. So yeah,
right.
yeah,
yeah. So
that's
he only
cool.
had like an hour and 28 minutes to make all these decisions,
Mm-hmm.
or to basically reorient his entire way of approaching problems or thinking about things. That's not very long.
Yeah, it's actually very cool. It's a good movie. I enjoyed it when I watched it too. But I am a fan, so there's a slight bit of bias in there.
Me too. Me too. I'm definitely an Al Pacino fan.
Well, another actor that I'm a fan of is Clint Eastwood. Ever since watching him in the films, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and even before that, Wagon Train, TV series on television, getting used to Curly, his character there. So yeah, big fan of Clint Eastwood. Well, I have a Clint Eastwood film in the latter part of his years in being involved in films as an actor. He's picked a pretty decent roles for himself, and I think this is one of those roles. The movie I'm talking about is called In the Line of Fire. And this film stars Clint Eastwood, John Malkovich, and Rene Russo primarily in the film. This came out in 1993. This is directed by Wolfgang Peterson. And the movie basically talks about a Secret Service agent who is getting up in his years. And he is one of the prestigious Secret Service agents of the early 60s. And we have a scenario here where he's one of those Secret Service agents that is assigned to the president, and he's been on the president's detail for most of his career. And just like anything else, as people change and situations change, new people are coming into the fold that you have to be a mentor to. But that's not his deal. He just wants to do his job, get it done, be there, and then retire. Well, something happens in part of this particular uh, Secret Service agent who's Frank Harrigan. And what happens is he is on the detail for President Kennedy in 1963 when President Kennedy is assassinated. Now, he did everything he could as an agent to try to protect the president during the cavalcade. Um, After the shots were done and trying to get the president and Jackie Kennedy to safety. But just like anything else, as a Secret Service agent or any agent trying to do their job, if they are not able to do that job well, there is a stigma. There is that follows them. And this movie talks about that for him. Jack still trying to do his job, did nothing wrong, um, but yet, that it's there. It's just there. Um, some people respect him highly. Some people don't care or think he's washed up and it's time for the old dinosaur to get out of there. But after you've devoted your whole life to this stuff, what do? You keep going. You keep going until you can't keep going anymore. Well, then there's the crazy people out there who are trying to do everything they can to disrupt those things. And they know the history and lineage of the Secret Service, and especially especially Frank. And so now Frank's starting to get information that makes him feel like the president's life's in danger. And now it gets to the point where now they know these things are happening, and yet they're trying to avoid them, and they're doing an okay job because of all the clues that Frank gets. But also, too, now we have somebody out there they know for a fact is playing a dangerous game, and he's using Frank as that scapegoat in doing this dangerous game because now he's challenged Frank to be a better Secret Service agent. And so in this movie, we have a clever assassin who is trying to bait Frank's character. And Frank, being the Secret Service agent that he is, the warhorse that he is, very determined person that he is, he's going to find out who this is. And he's going to do what he was not able to do before and trying to protect the president. And that's what the killer wants him to do, because the killer wants not just to kill the president, he wants to get Frank too. So we've got a really good cat and mouse here. Frank trying to be, as we were talking about in the other films, a step ahead, because now he's a race against time. And there's so many things that the president has to do, so many places that he has to be, and so many things that the Secret Service agents have to do. And now you have to try to coordinate the Secret Service agents, who are, some of them are listening, some of them aren't paying attention, and some of them are too gung-ho, like his new quote-unquote partner, which is played by Dylan McDermott. So here's poor Frank trying to get it done. And in this film, our assassin is John Malkovich. So if you've seen John Malkovich in any film, you find him eerily alluring. and, and it's no different in this film. And so as you see this cat and mouse, you get more and more intrigued. And you think you know the ending, and you really don't. And so this has it's not a trick ending per se, but it's an interesting ending. And it's an ending that you try to figure out because you're running out of time also. Try to figure out what that ending's going to be. And I think 6 times out of 10, maybe even 7 times out of 10, you're wrong. So it behooves you to watch this film and get all the clues, because you got to be as fast, and if not faster than Frank, to figure out, to keep Frank alive, keep the president alive, keep everybody alive in this one, because it's a pure cat and mouse, and there's no easy fix. The protagonist in this film is just that, and he's very good at what he does, and there's a reason, and I'm not going to tell you why. So everybody out there, another good film to watch. Came out in 1993, but I think it's a film worth watching. And if you've seen it, watch it again, because it's worth it. If you haven't seen it, I think it would be to your best interest to see this film. Again, it's In the Line of Fire, starring Clint Eastwood, John Malkovich, and Rene Russo, and Dylan McDermott. I did mention that. So definitely a good movie to watch. I've seen it 3 times. It's a wonderful film.
It is worthwhile. I went to the movies to see this one when it came out. I really enjoyed it, especially John Malkovich's performance.
Yep. Yes, indeed. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've kind of went a little long in the tooth tonight. We're trying to get better, to be more efficient, and get you our opinions and views about the movies that we're uh, theming to discuss. And so we thank you for listening, and we hope you tell your friends, families, um, give us a shot. Listen to some of our archives at our uh, channel on YouTube called A Real Point of View, and uh, try to be with us next time for some more information on some real wonderful films. And this looks to be a good year. I know we're getting to the latter part of it, but 2017 seems to have had some pretty decent films. Looking forward to a lot of new films coming out in 2018. And for you Marvel Universe people out there, Black Panther coming out in February. It really looks good and has some really, really good actors in this film. And also, too, hey, Steve, why don't you tell people real quickly about the movie you told me about that I watched with a really pretty good cast and has, I don't know why I can't think of his name right now. Kaiser Soze. Help me out here, guys.
Kevin Spacey.
Thank you. Kevin Spacey film. Um, and uh, Jamie Foxx.
Mm-hmm. That's Kevin Spacey, Jamie Foxx. The movie's called Baby Driver. Um, it, from the title, you have no, you kind of have an idea, but you really have no idea how this movie's gonna go. This movie is a mix of Lucky Number 11, The Transporter, and Greg pointed out that it's got a little bit of Grease mixed in there too. The music soundtrack is phenomenal. The
Phenomenal.
movie phenomenal. The movie follows Baby, who is a driver for Kevin Spacey's character. Kevin Spacey, who puts together these jobs for bank robbers, and he never works with the same team twice. But Baby is the driver. He's his lucky driver. He's never been caught. He's never had issues, and it just the driving skills and the prowess of this character. The character of Baby himself is very very interesting. He has a partial hearing impairment and has a vibration or a ringing that's always in. So he uses music out the vibration, and that allows him to do what he does. And it's partial beat the clock, because every single job that he does, I mean, even the kind of the movie itself from the halfway point to the end is kind of a beat the clock movie.
It is.
And just the driving that he does, the way he interacts with the people around him, the way he interacts with his foster father, and everything that goes on in this movie is done absolutely perfectly. I would really, me personally, I give this movie an 8.5, 9 out of 10.
Yeah.
Um,
This
but
is one of the most seamless movies. I mean,
oh, and it's
it flows.
scene to scene.
It's seamless and flows. It just flows.
And
And
even with the driving doesn't feel almost, it doesn't feel jerked. It doesn't feel like you're transitioning in an odd way. It's like Greg said, it's a smooth movie. It's an incredibly smooth movie. And what was that movie Jamie Foxx was in where he's the cop and he's going after the guys who took his son?
Sleepless.
Okay, I told Greg that I did, and I have not seen the movie Sleepless yet, that I could not view Jamie Foxx playing the character that he plays in Sleepless. I need to see that movie now, because after Baby Driver, I could believe Jamie Foxx could play just about anybody.
Yeah, yeah, most
Like, now,
definitely.
he has completed his cycle of playing every single kind of character to me. And it puts him in a higher. This movie helps me put him in a higher standing with really, really great actors.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think what happens is in Sleepless, it's kind of a tweener,
Mm-hmm.
character-wise, in Sleepless, but very serious acting.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, in this film, Baby Driver, it was a Jamie Foxx I didn't like, and that was good because he wasn't supposed to be likable, and so he does a really good job with that in this film.
Hmm.
So, Baby Driver definitely a must. And I probably mentioned this recently in one of the shows that episodes we had here. You got to see um, Chadwick Boseman in the movie Message from the King. I think this is my guilty pleasure anymore because it's a movie that's seamless and it has a surprise ending. And Chadwick Boseman, for me, his career, he's on the upswing. And this is one of those films that was not a very high budgeted film, and it went straight to video, but it was one of those films that you should not miss. And I believe it's on Netflix.
Oh,
So you
well,
definitely want to see Message from the King with Chadwick Boseman.
I saw Chadwick Boseman and Marshall last week, and I went to the movies to see that.
How was that?
And I really enjoyed it. I loved it. You know, it was just he was so good as Marshall. I mean, there have been some critiques of the movie because in some ways the focus almost seemed to be more on his second chair law partner. The his name was Steve. I can't remember his name. He's a real life person who was an insurance attorney who, as a result of his association with Thurgood Marshall, became a staunch civil rights advocate and an attorney for civil rights. Some criticism that the movie almost seemed to focus more on him than on Marshall because of the case that was chosen to profile Marshall. But I think you could say that, but Chadwick Boseman was still just very compelling as Marshall, and just really just presented this sort of well-rounded, interesting person. I mean, he became a person instead of like this sort of, you know, floating head who becomes a Supreme Court justice. He's a man with feelings. He has passions. He has a sense of humor. You know, he gets mad. He's a very passionate man. That's why he was with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund before there practically was an NAACP Legal Defense Fund. This was not a casual decision. It's not like I need the job. No, this was a matter of life or death for him. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm so glad I went to see it.
Yeah, and I think again, as I alluded to a moment ago, he's on the rise. And I don't know about this Baby Driver guy, but I thought he did an excellent job. I don't think anyone, we were talking about Al Pacino a moment ago, I don't think anyone else could play this role. This kid, I don't even know who this guy is, but he did this really, really well. And it wasn't anything about his character that I didn't like.
Hmm.
You know, and with all the adversity that he has to deal with, he dealt with it well. He dealt with it like I expected him to deal with it for the most part. And he even excerpted my expectations in how he dealt with it. And then as the movie progresses, we get a little bit more personality, personal essence of this guy as the movie continues to progress. And it matters. And that's the cool thing about it. It mattered and it didn't take it over the top. So it's a pretty good movie. I only saw an hour of it, and then I saw Steve, and I said, "Dude, yeah, I'm liking this movie. This is one of my movies. You could tell. This is my."
And then
Nice.
I was literally the whole time, go finish it. Go finish it. Go finish it right now. Just leave work and go finish it.
Thank God I didn't take that advice. But but when I got home, yeah, most definitely.
Which is
And
why you still have a home.
Yeah, right.
Just saying that out loud, making sure they know I did not leave.
For the record.
For the record. All right. Cool. Well, thanks again, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging out with us here on The Real Point of View. Check out our site there on YouTube, our channel, A Real Point of View. Check out our archives and this current show and watch it again, get some pointers. And we hope that you really embrace the films that we've discussed and embrace the films that you're looking forward to seeing. So thanks again for joining us here, and everybody have a wonderful night. See you guys later. Take care, Steve. Take care, Karen.
Take care,
Bye.
Greg. Bye.
Bye. Woohoo. We're out of here.